In 1621, the Ottoman Imperial Army marched north with its full weight. They did not advance to test, they advanced to break. But what stood in their way was not a stone wall. It was a tight, layered defensive system, a maze of trenches and defenders who refused to submit. And then the war dragged on. For more than a month, the two forces pressed against each other. Cannons thundered day and night. Trenches collapsed and were cleared again through smoke and fire. Sudden raids struck in the darkness, then vanished, leaving only panic behind. This was not a battle decided by a single decisive blow. It was a battle of endurance. And at Khotyn, the expansion of an empire was forced to stop. In the early 1600s, Eastern Europe lived under constant pressure. Not full war, but never real peace. To the south stood the Ottoman Empire, powerful and expanding, determined to keep its northern frontier secure. Moldavia and Wallachia were under Ottoman influence, acting as buffer lands that protected the empire's edge. To the north was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was one of the largest states in Europe at the time, confident in its strength and deeply involved in the politics of the border regions. It did not accept the idea that the Ottomans alone should control Moldavia. Between these two powers, violence never truly stopped. Cossack forces launched raids from rivers and steppes, striking Ottoman coastal towns and supply routes. In response, Crimean Tatar forces rode north, burning villages and taking captives. Each side blamed the other. Each incident demanded retaliation. Over time, these clashes stopped being isolated events. They became a cycle. In 1620, that cycle exploded. The Commonwealth sent an army into Moldavia, hoping to strengthen its influence before the Ottomans could react decisively. The plan failed completely. At the Battle of Siekora, the campaign collapsed. During the retreat, the army lost cohesion. Senior commanders were killed. Units broke apart. Survivors fled north in disorder. This defeat changed everything. News of Siekora spread quickly. It reached Istanbul, where Sultan Osman II saw an opportunity. He was young and determined to prove his authority. To him, Siekora was not just a victory over an enemy army. It was a sign that the Commonwealth was vulnerable. Osman II decided on a major campaign. Not a raid, not a warning. A decisive march north. The Ottoman plan was straightforward. Assemble a massive army, cross into Moldavia, advance to the Dniester River, and force the Commonwealth into submission before winter arrived. With superior numbers and momentum, the Ottomans expected resistance to collapse. Meanwhile, leaders of the Commonwealth faced a hard reality. They knew they could not defeat the Ottoman army in open battle. The difference in size was too great. A single field battle would likely mean destruction. So instead of seeking confrontation, they looked for a place where the Ottomans could not fully use their strength. That place was Khotyn. Khotyn was a fortress overlooking the Dniester River. It controlled one of the main crossing points in the region. Any large army moving north had to pass through this area. More importantly, the terrain around Khotyn allowed for strong defensive positions. The Commonwealth made its decision. They would not try to stop the Ottomans quickly. They would try to stop them completely. That decision changed the nature of the coming conflict. This would not be a war decided in a single charge or a single afternoon. It would be shaped by geography, timing, and endurance. Both sides now moved toward the same point on the map. Both believed they understood what would happen next, and neither yet realized how costly that belief would become. Ahead of them stood Khotyn, not yet a battlefield, not yet a graveyard, just a place where two powers were about to commit themselves, with no clear way back. The Ottoman campaign did not begin with chaos, it began with order. In the summer of 1621, the Ottoman Empire assembled one of its largest armies in years. Tens of thousands of men gathered under imperial banners. Regular infantry, janissaries trained for siege and assault, heavy and light cavalry, artillery units with field guns meant to break formations and fortifications. Crimean Tatar horsemen rode alongside them, fast and aggressive, meant to widen the battlefield far beyond any single fortress. This was not an army built for hesitation, it was built for pressure. The commanders expected resistance, but not paralysis. They believed that size, discipline, and reputation would do most of the work before the fighting even began. Fortresses were meant to fall. Enemy morale was meant to crack. The march itself was supposed to be a warning, so the army moved north. Supply trains followed carefully planned routes. Engineers prepared to deal with rivers and rough ground. Weapons were inspected, ammunition counted. Orders were clear: move fast, reach the Dniester, and force the issue before time became an enemy. From the Ottoman point of view, this campaign was already halfway decided. What remained was execution. North of the Dniester, the Commonwealth prepared very differently. They did not begin with movement. They began with planning. Commonwealth commanders understood that once the Ottoman army arrived, there would be no chance to improvise. Every mistake would be paid for immediately. So before a single trench was dug, decisions were made about what kind of battle this would be and what kind it would never be. There would be no open field engagement. There would be no pursuit of glory. There would be no attempt to match numbers. Instead, the plan was based on delay and control. The goal was to force the Ottomans to stop, to make them fight where their size became a burden rather than an advantage, to turn speed into congestion and confidence into frustration. Khotyn was chosen because it supported this plan. The fortress overlooked the Dniester, but more importantly, the surrounding terrain allowed defenses to extend outward. This meant the battle would not be decided at a single wall, but across a wide, prepared zone. Once the plan was set, the work began. Trenches were not dug at random. They followed the logic of the plan. Lines were layered, not straight. Positions overlapped, so attackers could never face only one direction of fire. Earthworks were built to absorb impact, not to look impressive. Artillery positions were selected with restraint. Guns were placed where they could disrupt formations and slow advances, not where they could chase dramatic results. Ammunition was stored carefully because every shot would matter. Cavalry units were kept in reserve, trained to move quickly along internal routes behind the lines. Their purpose was not to charge, but to respond, to seal breaches, reinforce weak points, and prevent panic from spreading. And then there were the Cossacks. Their role was planned in advance. They were not an afterthought. They were assigned to the edges, the gaps, and the dark spaces between fixed positions. Their task was to stretch the battlefield beyond daylight, to harass, to scout, and to deny the Ottomans any sense of rest or security. Inside the camp, preparation went beyond weapons and earth. Discipline was enforced early. Rations were organized before shortages appeared. Units memorized their sectors. Movements were practiced until they became routine. Soldiers were told the truth, not promises of victory, but expectations of hardship. By the time Ottoman scouts began to appear across the river, the defenders were no longer building. They were waiting. Both sides had completed their preparations with very different assumptions. The Ottomans believed they were about to apply force. The defenders believed they were about to absorb it. And with that difference, the battlefield was already taking shape, even before the first shot was fired. When the Ottoman army finally reached the area around Khotyn, there was no immediate clash. Both sides paused. From the Ottoman side, this pause was deliberate. Commanders needed to see the ground for themselves. The size of the defensive system mattered more than expected. What had looked like a single fortress from afar revealed itself as a wide belt of trenches, ramparts, and prepared positions stretching across the landscape. This was not a target to rush. It was a position to be studied. Ottoman artillery was brought forward slowly. Infantry units were positioned carefully. Scouts moved along the edges of the defensive lines, watching for movement, counting guns, measuring distances. Every detail was reported upward. The army was preparing to fight, but first it needed to understand what kind of fight this would be. Inside the defensive lines, the defenders felt the shift immediately. The silence changed. It became heavy. From the trenches, soldiers could see Ottoman columns forming in the distance. Dust hung in the air. Flags appeared and disappeared as units repositioned. No attack came, but no one doubted that it would. Orders moved quietly through the lines. No one advanced. No one withdrew. This was the moment when preparation ended and exposure began. The first contact came not with a full assault, but with testing. Small Ottoman units moved forward cautiously, approaching the outer earthworks. Their goal was not to break through, it was to force a response, to see how quickly the defenders reacted, to see where fire came from and where it did not. The defenders responded exactly as planned. Shots were fired in controlled bursts. No unit pursued. No one broke formation. The trenches did what they were built to do: absorb pressure without revealing weakness. Encouraged by what they learned, Ottoman commanders increased the pressure slightly. Artillery fire followed. Not a bombardment meant to shatter defenses, but measured strikes aimed at specific sections. The ground shook. Earth fell into trenches. Repairs began immediately, even under fire. Still, the line held. As daylight fighting remained limited, the nature of the battle began to change after sunset. Night removed visibility, but it sharpened tension. Cossack units slipped beyond the defenses, just as planned. They did not attack in strength. They attacked selectively. Pickets vanished. Supply parties were disrupted. Alarms rang without clear targets. Fires broke out where no attack was expected. For the Ottoman army, the campaign's rhythm broke. Men slept in armor. Officers struggled to maintain order in the dark. Every sound felt like a threat. The sense of control that came with numbers began to erode. Inside the defenses, the cost was quieter but constant. Wounded were treated, ammunition was counted. Trenches were repaired again and again. Fatigue settled in, but discipline held. The system built in preparation was now being tested, and so far it was working. By the end of these first days, both sides had learned something important. The Ottomans understood that this would not be a quick victory. The defenders understood that the pressure would only increase. The battle had not yet reached its peak, but it had already taken its shape, and from this point forward, every day would hurt more than the last. After the first days of contact, the battle entered a different phase. There were no surprises left, only repetition, and repetition was deadly. Ottoman commanders now committed larger forces, not all at once, but in waves. Each assault was meant to push a little deeper, to collapse a section of trench, to force the defenders into a mistake. The first major push came against the outer earthworks. Infantry advanced under covering fire. Janissaries moved forward with discipline, closing distance step by step. Artillery hammered the ground ahead of them, tearing apart parapets and filling trenches with soil and debris. For a moment, parts of the line bent. Defenders fell back to secondary positions exactly as planned. Reserves moved forward. Fire concentrated on narrow approaches. What looked like progress for the attackers turned into congestion. Men pressed forward with nowhere to go. Losses mounted quickly. The assault stalled. Ottoman commanders regrouped and tried again. This time, attacks came from multiple directions. Pressure was applied along wider sections of the line, attempting to stretch the defenders thin. Cavalry probed the flanks, searching for gaps. Artillery fire intensified. The defenders responded methodically. Units rotated in and out of the front lines. Damaged sections were repaired under fire. Commanders moved constantly, reinforcing weak points before they could collapse. The system absorbed the blows, but every impact left a mark. By now, casualties were no longer abstract numbers. Bodies filled trenches. The wounded lay everywhere. Water sources became polluted. Disease began to appear, spreading quietly among exhausted men. And still, the attacks continued. Night offered no relief. Ottoman attempts to regroup were disrupted by constant harassment. Cossack units struck supply lines, attacked isolated positions, and vanished into darkness. Fires burned, horses panicked, sleep disappeared. In response, Ottoman discipline hardened. Punishments increased. Orders became harsher. Fatigue turned into anger. Inside the defensive camp, the situation was no easier. Food grew scarce. Ammunition had to be rationed. Men fought with injuries that would normally remove them from the line. Yet withdrawal was never discussed. There was nowhere to withdraw to. As September wore on, leadership itself became strained. Jan Karol Chodkiewicz, already weakened by illness, continued to command from within the defenses. Decisions weighed heavier each day. The strain showed not in speeches, but in silence. Orders were shorter, movements slower. The cost of every choice was clear. Then, the moment came that threatened to unravel everything. Chodkiewicz died during the siege. For a brief moment, the entire defensive system stood on the edge of collapse. News spread quickly through the camp. Fear followed close behind. Not fear of the enemy, fear that direction itself had been lost. But the collapse did not come. Command passed to those he had prepared. The plan remained. The discipline held. The defenses continued to function, not because of inspiration, but because the system had been built to survive even this. Ottoman commanders pressed harder, sensing opportunity. Assaults intensified. Fire grew heavier. The ground shook day after day. But the breakthrough never came. By the end of September, both armies were trapped in the same reality. Neither could advance without unbearable loss. Neither could withdraw without humiliation. The battle had become a contest of exhaustion, and exhaustion was winning. By early October, the battle was no longer being shaped by attacks. It was being shaped by limits. Both armies had reached the edge of what they could physically sustain. Not because one side had lost the will to fight, but because the environment itself had begun to dictate terms. Autumn arrived fully around Khotyn. Cold nights settled in. Rain turned the ground heavy and unstable. Trenches filled with water. Equipment rusted. Illness spread faster than orders. For men already exhausted, the weather became another enemy, one that could not be fought or intimidated. For the Ottoman army, these conditions created a strategic problem. A force this large required constant movement of food, ammunition, and fodder. Every delay increased strain on supply lines stretching back through Moldavia. Horses weakened. Units became uneven. What had once felt like unstoppable momentum now demanded constant maintenance just to avoid collapse. For the defenders, survival had come at a severe cost. They had held the line, but the price was written across the camp. Losses were heavy. Food was limited. Many soldiers could barely stand, let alone fight. And yet, the line still existed. That fact alone mattered. At this stage, both sides understood the same reality. A decisive breakthrough was no longer realistic, but neither side could accept defeat. This was the moment when the battlefield quietly shifted away from soldiers and toward commanders. Signals were sent. Messengers moved carefully between camps. Talks began, not as an admission of weakness, but as recognition of reality. Each side approached negotiations carrying both pride and exhaustion. The terms discussed reflected the nature of the campaign. No sweeping conquest, no crushing surrender. Instead, boundaries. The Dniester River would remain the recognized frontier. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth agreed to restrain Cossack raids. The Ottomans agreed to restrain Crimean Tatar incursions. Moldavia would remain under Ottoman influence, but without further escalation. On paper, it looked like balance. On the ground, it felt like relief. When the agreement was reached, the fighting stopped, not with celebration, but with silence. Men lowered weapons slowly. Camps remained tense for days, unsure whether the pause was real. Eventually, movement began. Ottoman forces prepared to withdraw. The defenders stayed in place, watching. The battle had ended without a final charge, without a dramatic collapse. It ended because continuing had become pointless. Khotyn had not been decided by strength alone. It had been decided by endurance, and by the moment when endurance finally ran out. Khotyn did not redraw the map of Europe, but it changed how power was understood. For the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Khotyn proved that survival was still possible against an empire, if discipline, planning, and endurance held together. It became a reminder that borders were not defended by size alone, but by preparation and resolve. For the Cossacks, the battle confirmed their role as more than auxiliaries. They had shaped the rhythm of the campaign, especially at night, and their influence could no longer be ignored. For the Ottoman Empire, Khotyn left a deeper scar. Sultan Osman II returned without the decisive victory he had promised. Disappointment turned into tension. Tension turned into crisis. Within a year, he would be overthrown and killed by his own troops. And that is the final meaning of Khotyn. Not a story of conquest, not a story of collapse, but a moment where expansion stopped and endurance proved stronger than momentum.